Hey guys, LevelCap here. Today I want to talk about the 10 most impactful first-person shooter games of all times. These shooter games that I'm going to talk about here have either defined the shooter genre or innovated the shooter genre in ways that set the new standard on what we expect from a first-person shooter. And we're going to go through this list chronologically, which means we absolutely have to start with Wolfenstein 3D, often hailed as the first-person shooter. Technically, there were some other 3D games that came before this that had first-person perspectives. There's a tank game, a maze runner game, but this is what actually defined itself as a first-person shooter and laid the groundwork for all other games to follow. Released in 1992 by id Software, now legends of the first-person shooter gaming industry, this game took place in Castle Wolfenstein, where you played a spy going around shooting Nazis. It was fairly straightforward in terms of clearing out rooms, finding better weapons and power-ups, and progressing to the next level. And although the game is called Wolfenstein 3D, which was a selling point at that time, if your game was 3D, it was more advanced graphically than a 2D game, obviously, not all elements in the game were actually fully three-dimensional. And although Wolfenstein was very popular among PC gamers, it wasn't until their next game that came out in 1993, Doom, which basically put the first-person shooter on the map outside of just the gaming realm. Everybody knew what Doom was. The game, in fact, was so popular that in 1995 it was estimated that there were more copies of Doom installed on people's computers than Windows 95, which actually prompted Microsoft to make a port of Doom for Windows 95, actually led by then employee Gabe Newell. Kind of crazy to think, right? Lord Gaben actually worked for Microsoft and ported Doom onto Windows 95 at one point in his career. Just totally insane. Now, after Doom, there's a lot of innovations with trying to get first-person shooters to work online. There was a lot of technical problems. Doom 2 added the ability to dial up onto somebody else's computer and play with them like that. There was a lot of innovations with LAN support. Quake made some very, very good innovations in 1996 with this, but one of the first truly good multiplayer shooters, in my opinion, was Goldeneye on the N64. You'd plug in 4 controllers on the N64, split the screen 4 ways, and have at it. You could have 2v2 matches, play free-for-all. It was a blast, and it was the first console shooter that really said, hey, you want to play a first-person shooter on the console? It works, and it is a total blast. The controls were actually pretty rudimentary at the time, and you have to remember that in these times, a lot of shooters didn't actually incorporate a lot of aiming upward, or aiming upward and downward was kind of difficult and hard to do. And even though some of the games on PC supported mouse control, a lot of them, in fact, I don't think it was till Quake 2, supported aiming up and down with the mouse. It was only left and right. So you can imagine things were quite simple and yet complicated at the same time, because nobody had really solidified a good control scheme, especially for console gaming. Next year in 1998, Epic released Unreal, which debuted the new Unreal Engine, and this game was all about graphics. It was about touting amazing looking visuals, and I remember playing through the single player for the first time and seeing this amazing reflective surface, and you didn't really see that in shooter games before this. They were playing around with new textures and new shading. They had massive open environments, which was very uncommon to see. The engine was very impressive, and it had a really fun arena-like multiplayer aspect, which spawned Unreal Tournament and countless other Unreal-related games. And the engine was so powerful, so visually beautiful, and easy to use that it became an industry standard, and a lot of other developers started using it. Heck, I'm playing a lot of Squad right now, which is being developed on the Unreal Engine. Now, 1998 was a great year for gaming, and less than a month after the Unreal Engine came out, Half-Life was released. November 8th, everybody got to play the amazing single-player experience that was Half-Life, with incredibly well-crafted set pieces and new AI coding that upped the challenge level, or what kind of opponents we could expect to fight against. Traditionally, it was always just simplistic AI that were damage sponges, and Half-Life taught us that the average soldier or special operations unit could be fast and more accurate than us, and know how to move around the environment in a quick, nimble way that kept us thinking, thinking on our feet. And it was just a whole new immersive experience that I think nobody had really yet to experience in a first-person shooter. And of course it supported a multiplayer game, which was just sort of weapons from the single player and a few maps, and you'd run around and shoot each other, and it was kind of fun and gimmicky, but it was strong, robust netcode, and it spawned a whole bunch of popular multiplayer games like Team Fortress and Counter-Strike, and we'll be talking about Counter-Strike in just a second here. Now, obviously, everybody was getting into multiplayer shooters. It was kind of the craze around 98 and 99, and in 1999, id released Quake 3, which was the first AAA game to be released without any single-player support. It was multiplayer exclusive, which was pretty ballsy at the time because this was still a period where not everybody had the internet in their home, so releasing a game that only worked online was incredibly risky. And I remember at that specific time that we did have the internet, but I mean, you know, you'd either have like a 14.4 modem or maybe a 28.8, and you'd be playing with incredibly high ping sometime, or if somebody got on the phone and disconnected you from the internet, it would mess up your gaming session. So it wasn't just like, oh, I got this game and I'm playing online and it's great. There was a lot of hurdles to get around to actually have a good multiplayer experience, but ultimately it did pay off, and Quake 3 was essentially one of the first truly competitive shooters. They had tournaments for Quake 3, and I remember hearing about the best Quake 3 players in the world. Now that same year, Counter-Strike came out, and although we might think of Counter-Strike at times as being a fast-paced game, at this point in time, arena shooters were kind of where it was at for the first-person shooter, so there wasn't really much in the way of tactical shooters. We had Rainbow Six. Tom Clancy's first Rainbow Six came out in 98, but it wasn't quite as successful as Counter-Strike became almost overnight. And you have to remember, Counter-Strike was pretty much developed by two people and then the community. In fact, I don't think it actually ever came out with its own maps. They just had the community develop maps for it, and then they would include the highest rated maps in the next release of the game. In a way, you can almost think of it as the game as being crowdsourced. You know, there's so much community feedback from the very start, and the maps were all developed by the community, and changes to the game were influenced and made a lot by initial community feedback. It was kind of a revolutionary thing at the time. And again, although it wasn't the first tactical shooter ever created, it was the first tactical shooter to become a truly competitive game and put tactical shooters on the map in a very real way. Now that same year, 1999, the very first teaser trailer for Halo was released. It was actually released at a Apple press conference, which is totally insane. Steve Jobs himself introduced the video, and the world just went crazy because we had never seen a game before that featured this kind of gigantic outdoor open world environments at a graphical fidelity of this level. It was blowing people's minds. And you might be thinking, wait, why was the Halo trailer shown in an Apple press conference? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to show a game that's going to come out on an Xbox at an Apple press conference. You're like advertising for the enemy. Well, at that time, Bungie was a very popular Mac developer, and they made a lot of Mac games. Some of them were ported to PC, but they always came out on Mac first. So this was going to be a big triumph for Mac gaming. And then Bungie signed a contract with Microsoft to release the game exclusively on Xbox, and that was the end of that. The game then got delayed substantially, and it came out in 2001 and was a huge success, redefining what we thought was possible for first-person shooters on the console. It popularized the dual analog stick controls, basically solidified them as this is how we play shooters on a console now. It spawned its own competitive gaming league on console, and it basically launched the Xbox as a new console platform. Now, interestingly enough, what a lot of people don't realize is that Halo was actually supposed to be a much larger, huge open world game where you're going to be free to drive around the entire expanse of this ring world. The ambition for the initial project was huge, and I imagine they had to basically squash a lot of those grandiose ideas when creating it for a console platform. It's always interesting to wonder what Halo might have been, but it was still a massive, massive triumph for console first-person shooter gaming. And then late next year, DICE put themselves on the map with Battlefield 1942. This game redefined what I thought was possible in a first-person shooter. 64 players supported in multiplayer with full-on vehicle and airplane and boat gameplay. Sure, some games had supported some vehicle stuff. Halo was probably one of the better ones that supported vehicles in multiplayer, but the player count was laughable compared to what Battlefield offered. For a long time, gamers had often wondered what it would actually be like to have a huge multiplayer game with armies and vehicles on either side, and realized that in full-on multiplayer goodness, and this was the first game to truly do it right. Now, at this point in first-person shooter history, we had tackled a lot of the big ticket items. Large-scale games, competitive games, arena shooter games, really good multiplayer games, good console games, and it wasn't until I think around 2007 that we saw our next big innovation of the first-person shooter with Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. Now, Call of Duty, the franchise, had obviously seen a lot of success. The very first iteration of the game was very fun, extremely immersive, great set design, great single-player experience, and their multiplayer was, generally speaking, pretty good. It was never something that I got really addicted to, though. It always kind of seemed fairly standard overall, but Call of Duty 4 took it to a new level with all kinds of new innovation, and one of the biggest things was the integration of RPG elements to first-person shooter, leveling up, gaining experience, allowing that experience to unlock new items and equipment in games. This was something that wasn't really prevalent in first-person shooters until Call of Duty 4 popularized it. There's also a huge amount of class customization. Sure, you could pick different roles in other first-person shooters, but this one allowed you to take a role and then switch out guns and put different attachments on your guns and equip perks and truly make your class and your character unique. It was the first time we saw in-game kill streaks, which have become a staple of Call of Duty, and other games have started to borrow upon this concept as well. And it was also, I believe, the first time we saw on-screen point multiplier, so it would tell you how many points and how much experience you're gaining for doing certain actions in the game, just letting you know in real time exactly how much you are progressing or helping your team. These elements that many people might consider to be simple by today's standards were first implemented in Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare and have since become industry standards for almost all shooters that are coming out today. It's kind of crazy if you think about it. Now, of course, after Call of Duty and before, there have been plenty of influential games and great first-person shooters. This list of 10 games here is again the most impactful FPS games, the ones that have defined the genre and pushed it in new directions and permanently changed our concept of what's possible in FPS gaming since their release. What do you guys think about my list of 10? Are there any games that you would want added to it? Let me know in the comments down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, dislike if you didn't. And as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. This is LevelCap signing off.